Good morning. We are Group B, and today we're going to be talking about the Superfund sites Toms River in Modesto, California. Next slide. So first, we're going to discuss the chemical company Ciba-Geigy and the contamination at Toms River. First, we'll talk about the vulnerable population. So the most susceptible populations to the contamination of Toms River are children, pregnant women, and the employees of Ciba-Geigy. The children of the Dover Township are an especially vulnerable population because their bodies, immune systems, and nervous systems are still in development. And with the disposal of chemical waste in the river, the Atlantic, and into the ground, an aquifer that served as the main drinking source for the residents of Dover Township was contaminated, and children drinking the water and playing in the river were extremely vulnerable to the consequences of chemical contamination. Pregnant women are another vulnerable population. Chemicals that contaminate the groundwater are known to lead to miscarriages along with various cancers, brain cancers, and leukemia. Consuming the contaminated tap water leads to ingestion of these harmful chemicals, which adversely affect the body. One of these consequences being miscarriages, and then the fetuses are also adversely affected. Along with pregnant women, employees of Ciba-Geigy faced exposure to harmful and carcinogenic chemicals, along with air pollution every day at work. Along with the cancer clusters of the children in the Dover Township, there were clusters of cancer among employees of the manufacturing plant throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Next slide.
After the cancer cluster was realized in the community of Toms River, environmental exposure assessment was conducted. TCE, SAN trimer, and SAN dimer were found in Parkway Wellfield, which were suspected as the contaminant that caused the cancer cluster in the community. SAN trimer was also found in the soil in 1 mile radius of the rig farm. The main source of exposure is drinking water, environmental water, and soil contamination. Next slide, please. TCE can enter the body from skin contact with liquid products that contain TCE. For example, you will absorb some TCE if you don't wear gloves while spot cleaning the carpet with water or a product that contains TCE. TCE also enters body through skin from vapors in the air or from contaminated water while bathing, showering, or swimming. If you touch contaminated soil, a small amount of TCE will be absorbed through the skin. Short-term exposure of TCE can cause drowsy and headache. Long-term exposure of TCE can cause memory loss, difficulty in thinking, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and also cardiac defects. For SAN trimer, the modes of entry includes ingestion, inhalation, and dermal contact. EPA concluded that the initial epidemiology study reported statistically significant increase in childhood cancer incidence from 1979 to 1995. Also, in the case control study conducted in 2003, the study authors observed a statistically significant association with leukemia in females aged from 0 to 19 years of age and exposure to drinking water from the well fields containing multiple chemicals, including SAN trimer, some of which are known to demonstrate carcinogenic potential. Following cleanup and the removal of SAN trimer along with other chemicals such as TCE and other chemicals from the drinking water, the total childhood cancer and brain or central nervous system cancer incidence have returned to the normal levels, which is fewer than expected case of leukemia has also been observed. Next slide.
So possible prevention actions for the Toms River site include increasing oversight of the manufacturing plant, and this could involve federal and/or state involvement with the regular checks and disposal processes, along with contamination monitoring of the soil and water to make sure that the plant is staying within an acceptable range, likely set by the EPA. Another set of actions that could have prevented so much contamination is oversight of the Reich property. In 1971, an independent trucker disposed of 4,500 drums containing hazardous waste from a plastics manufacturing plant in Bound Brook operated by the Union Carbide Corporation. And this farm's groundwater is sucked directly into the Parkway well field. Being that this land is a major water source for the town, it should be monitored by local and state health departments, regardless of who is the owner of the land. It is important to ensure that the town is being supplied with safe drinking water. And lastly, we have increased engagement from residents of the town. It was noted by Dan Fagan, author of Tom's River, that residents were willing to essentially ignore the problem because Sibagagi was doing a lot economically for Tom's River. The chemical company provided many well-paying jobs, which means financial security and upward social mobility for residents who are employed at the plant. So methods of engagement and empowerment could be employed to encourage residents to advocate for their towns and peers. Next slide. So Sibagagi performed very questionable actions in the 1980s and 1990s. First and foremost, the company's waste was contaminating the river due to their disposal processes. 3 sites in the Dover Township ended up being declared hazardous by the New Jersey Department of Health. Dan Fagan, author of Tom's River, states that the first contamination event was with the company's own water wells, and their solution was simply to relocate the wells. Along with this, former SIBA executives admitted to illegally dumping pollutants into landfills on the company property. And then we also have the 4,500 barrels of waste that was buried at the farmland. There are very few pros associated with Sibagagi's actions. The most important pro was that the company ceased operations when told to do so. But there are also many cons associated with their actions, including the exposure to hazardous chemicals through groundwater and air pollution. And Ciba was likely able to get away with as much as they did for as long as they did because environmental policy was not as stringent as it is today. As we have learned more about carcinogens and the effects of other hazardous chemicals, we have implemented the necessary policies to protect ourselves and our environments. Next slide. The New Jersey Department of Health outlines their activity with Tom's River on their webpage. And the Department of Health developed a public health response to address the elevated cancer rates in Tom's River. This plan included updating and reevaluating the childhood cancer rates every 5 years, public health evaluations of potential environmental exposures, and public health education efforts. The Department of Health conducted assessments of Sibagagi, Wrights Farm, and the Dover Township Municipal Landfill in response to community concerns of contamination. These locations were deemed hazardous, and their reports were released in 2001. In 2003, they released the case control study of childhood cancers in the Dover Township. The pros of New Jersey's actions are that they responded to public concern and made their findings available to the public. Transparency with contamination was seriously lacking from the chemical company and the water company, so it was important that the department had released their findings to the public, as it would allow residents to confirm their suspicions and concerns with the hazardous locations. One con that was identified with the Department of Health was that their last cancer rate update was in 2008, meaning that the reports have not been released for the recent 5-year evaluations. Next slide. And last, we have the Environmental Protection Agency, which began overseeing the cleanup of Tom's River since 1983. These efforts focused on groundwater treatment, soil treatment, since a lot of waste was poured into the soil, and removal of the barrels and drums that were buried within the Superfund site. The EPA has been monitoring progress and updating the checkpoints on their Superfund site since. Pros associated with actions of the EPA include the treatment of 17 billion gallons of groundwater so far, the removal of 47,000 barrels from the property, and the implementation of a groundwater monitoring system. Cons associated with this site are comments that the EPA is moving too slow. While a lot of progress has been made, there is much left to do. Next slide. So now we'll go ahead and talk about Halford's Cleaners contamination at Modesto, California.
The most susceptible and/or vulnerable population within the Modesto, California area that have been exposed to contamination are those living near dry cleaning facilities or those living in suburban or urban areas. Tetrachloroethylene, because it is non-flammable and a colorless liquid, it is used as a dry cleaning agent and as a metal degreasing solvent. It is also used as a building block for creating other chemicals and is used in other consumer products. Those living in suburban and urban areas have been found to be exposed to high concentrations of toluene due to being close to facilities that use toluene. Emissions from automobiles are the main source for toluene to be in the air, with levels fluctuating based on automobile traffic. Although levels can be high outdoors, indoor levels can be just as high, and this can be due to toluene being a complete common indoor contaminant found among common household products such as paint, paint thinners, adhesives, nail polish, and even cigarette smoke.
So, as it was mentioned in the last slide, the two chemicals that are found in Modesto include both toluene and tetrachloroethene. Both chemicals can have different sources of exposure depending on the location, but specific to Modesto, toluene is specifically found in the groundwater, and tetrachloroethene is found in both the soil and the groundwater. For the modes of entry, specific to Modesto, toluene's main mode of entry includes ingestion. So with ingestion, it travels to the GI tract and then goes directly into the bloodstream. For tetrachloroethene, there are two main modes of entry, including inhalation or ingestion. Like toluene, with ingestion, it travels to the GI tract and then proceeds into the bloodstream. And with inhalation, it travels to the lungs and then into the bloodstream.
The largest origin of toluene being exposed to the atmosphere occurs during the production, transport, and use of gasoline. Small amounts of toluene tend to be released in industrial wastewater discharges and land disposal of petroleum waste and land disposal of sludges. Being exposed to toluene can cause nose and eye irritation, euphoria, confusion, and dizziness. Liver and kidney damage may happen as a result of exposure, as well as loss of coordination, memory loss, loss of appetite, and permanent neuropsychiatric effect. Acute exposure to tetrachloroethylene can cause irritation of the upper respiratory tract and eyes, kidney dysfunction, and neurological effects such as changes in behavior, impairment of coordination, dizziness, headache, sleepiness, reversible mood, and unconsciousness. In fact, such exposure has allowed the United States Environmental Protection Agency to classify tetrachloroethylene as likely to be carcinogenic. Next slide. Plausible prevention. To avoid situations like what happened in Modesto, California, there are currently no standards set for regulating the amount of toluene that is contaminating the air of homes, despite the federal government establishing that toluene being contaminated within water is considered safe at a maximum contaminant level of 1 ppm. Taking down product inventory and additional oversight of facilities utilizing these chemicals may allow for early detection of contaminant levels of soil or groundwater, and may allow for early detection of contaminant levels harmful for humans and or the environment. Providing protection can also assist in preventing and avoiding contamination. Providing proper ventilations and safety precautions for those working with products containing toluene can help both acute and chronic exposures. Those working in nail salons, printing establishments, auto repair, and construction activities are those who are most prone to long-term exposure. Next slide.
So now we're going to discuss the actions of the people responsible, Halford Cleaners, for this waste disposal. So around 1990, it was brought to the company's attention that this was happening, and it was actually brought to attention because they were doing a local well water sampling project by the local government, and they didn't do anything until the EPA actually ordered them to do something. So that did take a bit of a delay, and they ended up taking actions around 1991. Now, the pros of those actions, the company has been complying with the EPA mandated actions since that time. And around 1991, they started the installation of an SVE, which is a soil vapor extraction system that was really key in the initial steps to limiting human exposure risk. And eventually the EPA decided that they also needed a groundwater extraction system because of the level of contamination that took place. However, it wasn't clear in the documentation who ended up funding that. So it did get funded, which is a pro. The cons, so it's been a slower pace of the project. We can say that the company didn't respond right away, so obviously more people faced contamination than needed to face contamination. And due to the overall slower pace of the project, the site is actually being used commercially again since 2020, and the project is not considered complete. So there is still some risk to those people who are operating on the site at this time. Next slide, please. Okay, so other government actions. There was some action taken by the local government who brought the incident to the attention of the company. The state government ended up partnering with the EPA in the sense to make the cleanup plan. So as previously stated, the original recommendation was just the implementation of the SVE, and that was in 1991. In 1997, through continued sampling and testing, it became clear that this was not sufficient to complete the cleanup, and there was going to be another step needed. Since then, and up until this point, there has been 5-year checks. Everything has been going as planned. However, this was paused by the EPA, those 5-year checks, and also all further projects were paused by the EPA because they determined that they just needed to take more sampling and come to a more clear decision on how they're going to move forward. So based on the pros and cons, the pros is that multi-level coordination among the government has ensured that there are multiple levels of government checking to make sure that the project is going according to plan, and that human exposure and groundwater contamination sources are under control according to the EPA standards on their website. The cons are that it has been taking a lot longer than expected. The EPA has halted progress on the project to this point. We don't really know what's going to be done going forward. Next slide, please. We just have our references here that you can take a look at for the entire project for both case studies. And next slide, some more references there as well. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation. I hope it was an educational experience. Have a great day.